In a quiet little town where nothing exciting ever seemed to happen, the local courthouse was abuzz with anticipation. The air felt heavy as people filed into the room, whispering amongst themselves about the unusual event unfolding before them. For the first time in anyone's memory, a police dog had been called to participate in a trial. His name was Max, and he wasn't just any dog. He was a highly trained canine officer, known for his sharp instincts and unwavering focus. Everyone knew Max from news stories about how he'd helped solve crimes, but no one expected him to appear in court like this. The case at hand involved a high-ranking city official accused of corruption. It was a big deal because the defendant wasn't just some ordinary person. He was powerful, wealthy, and well-connected. People whispered that he might have bribed others to cover up his wrongdoings. That's where Max came in. According to Officer Clara Hayes, Max's handler, the dog could detect things humans couldn't, like hidden scents or subtle behavioral changes that hinted at dishonesty. Some skeptics rolled their eyes, thinking it sounded far-fetched, but Clara swore by Max's abilities. As the trial began, all eyes turned toward the front of the room where Max sat beside Clara. He looked calm and composed, his tail resting neatly on the floor. Clara gave him a reassuring pat on the head, and the two exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. They were partners who trusted each other completely, and you could see it in the way they moved together. Despite the tension in the room, Max didn't seem fazed. He simply stared ahead, alert yet relaxed, as if waiting for his cue. The prosecutor started questioning witnesses, trying to piece together evidence against the defendant. Meanwhile, the defense team worked hard to poke holes in the accusations, arguing that there wasn't enough proof to convict their client. Back and forth it went, with lawyers making impassioned speeches and the judge occasionally interjecting to keep things on track. Through it all, Max remained still, his ears perked up slightly as if listening intently to every word being said. What made the scene even more intriguing was the mix of reactions from those watching. Some leaned forward in their seats, fascinated by the idea of a dog playing such a pivotal role in a legal proceeding. Others crossed their arms, skeptical of whether Max's presence was truly necessary. A few reporters scribbled notes furiously, eager to capture every detail for their articles. And then there was Judge Robert Grayson, a stern man with a reputation for fairness, who occasionally glanced at Max with a raised eyebrow, clearly unsure what to make of this unconventional addition to his courtroom. Despite the murmurs and side conversations, the atmosphere remained tense. No one knew exactly what role Max would play, but everyone sensed that something important was about to unfold. Little did they know, the real drama was only moments away. And when it arrived, it would leave the entire room gasping in disbelief. Just as the courtroom settled into a rhythm, with lawyers making their arguments and witnesses recounting their stories, an unexpected disruption shattered the calm. It started subtly, a low growl from Max that caught Clara's attention. She glanced down at him, her brow furrowing slightly. Max wasn't one to make noise without reason, so she gently placed a hand on his back, hoping to reassure him. But instead of calming down, Max suddenly sprang to life. Without warning, he began barking loudly, his deep, resonant voice echoing through the silent courtroom. Heads turned in unison, eyes wide with surprise. What made it even more startling was the direction of his focus. Judge Robert Grayson. Max stood up, his body rigid, and continued barking directly at the judge. The sound was insistent, almost urgent, as if Max were trying to communicate something vital. Clara tugged lightly on his leash, whispering commands to quiet him, but Max wouldn't stop. His gaze remained locked on the judge, unwavering and intense. The room erupted into chaos. Spectators exchanged bewildered looks, unsure what to make of the situation. Some laughed nervously, thinking it might be a fluke or a random outburst. Others leaned forward, intrigued by the possibility that there was more to Max's behavior than met the eye. Lawyers on both sides scrambled to regain control of the proceedings, while Judge Grayson sat frozen in his chair, his face pale and expression unreadable. For a moment, It seemed like time had stopped. Clara, still holding onto Max's leash, tried everything she could think of to calm him. She kneeled beside him, speaking softly in his ear, but Max only grew more agitated. His barks became louder, sharper, filling the room with a sense of unease. Even those who didn't know much about dogs could tell this wasn't normal behavior for a trained canine officer. Something, or someone, had triggered him, and whatever it wasn't letting go. Judge Grayson finally broke his silence, raising his gavel to bring order to the room. "Enough," he barked, his voice cutting through the commotion. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Here was a man shouting over a dog that wouldn't stop barking at him. He turned to Clara, his tone sharp. "Control your animal, Officer Hayes, or I'll have no choice but to remove him from my courtroom." Clara nodded quickly, though her mind raced with questions. Why was Max behaving this way? What had set him off? She'd worked with him long enough to trust his instincts implicitly, and she knew better than to dismiss his actions as mere coincidence. Still, she couldn't let him continue causing a scene. With some effort, she managed to coax him back into a seated position, though his tail thumped against the floor in agitation. For a few seconds, the room fell silent again, the tension palpable. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Would Max settle down, or was this just the beginning? Defense attorneys jumped at the opportunity to object, claiming Max's behavior was prejudicial and disruptive. Prosecutors countered, suggesting it might actually be relevant given his training. Meanwhile, spectators whispered among themselves, speculating wildly about what Max might have sensed. As the murmurs grew louder, Judge Grayson slammed his gavel once more. "This court will take a 10-minute recess," he announced, his voice strained. "And when we return, I expect order to be restored." With that, he rose from his seat and disappeared into his chambers, leaving behind a room full of unanswered questions, and one very agitated dog whose bark had sent shockwaves through the entire courthouse. During the recess, the courtroom buzzed with hushed conversations as people tried to make sense of what had just happened. Some speculated that Max's outburst was nothing more than a fluke, a dog being a dog after all. Others weren't so quick to dismiss it. They whispered about how police dogs like Max were trained to detect things humans couldn't, and they wondered if his behavior might be pointing to something bigger. Could there really be a reason behind his sudden agitation? Or was this just an embarrassing distraction in an already tense trial? Clara led Max out of the courtroom and into a quiet hallway, hoping to calm him down and figure out what had triggered his reaction. She knelt beside him, running her fingers through his fur and speaking softly. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, searching his face for clues. Max's ears twitched, and he glanced back toward the courtroom door, as if trying to tell her something. Clara knew better than to ignore his instincts. He'd never acted this way without cause before. Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, opinions were divided. Defense attorneys argued that Max's behavior was irrelevant and disruptive, insisting it had no place in a serious legal proceeding. "This is a mockery of justice," one of them declared, throwing up his hands in frustration. On the other side, prosecutors saw an opportunity. "Max is a highly trained canine officer," one of them countered. "If he detected something suspicious, we should investigate further. It could be critical to the case." Spectators leaned in closer, eager to hear every word. Some nodded along with the defense, thinking the whole situation was absurd. Others sided with the prosecution, intrigued by the idea that Max might have uncovered something hidden. A few reporters scribbled notes furiously, imagining headlines about a heroic police dog saving the day. The tension in the room was electric, with everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Back in the hallway, Clara decided to take matters into her own hands. If Max was reacting to something specific, she needed to find out what it was. She returned to the courtroom with him, carefully observing his behavior as they re-entered. Almost immediately, Max began sniffing the air, his nose twitching as he moved closer to Judge Grayson's chair. Clara watched intently, her heart pounding. Was it possible that whatever set him off earlier was still here? She approached the bench cautiously, keeping Max close by her side. As he circled the area near the judge's seat, his movements became sharper, more deliberate. He stopped at the base of the chair, pawing gently at the wooden frame. Clara frowned, crouching down to examine it more closely. At first glance, everything seemed normal. But then she noticed something odd. There was a faint discoloration on the underside of the chair, almost like tape or some kind of adhesive. Her pulse quickened as she realized what it might mean. Max wasn't barking randomly. He was trying to draw attention to something important. Whatever it was, it had caught his sharp senses, and now, thanks to his instincts, they were on the verge of uncovering something significant. But before Clara could say anything, Judge Grayson emerged from his chambers, looking even more uneasy than before. His eyes darted between Max and Clara, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw a flicker of fear cross his face. The courtroom grew silent once again as everyone turned their attention to Clara and Max. What would they do next? And what secrets lay hidden beneath Judge Grayson's chair? One thing was certain. Max's bark had opened a door that no one expected, and nobody knew where it would lead. Clara's mind raced as she knelt by Judge Grayson's chair, her fingers tracing the faint outline of something unusual on its underside. Max stood beside her, his body tense and alert, his nose still twitching as if confirming that he'd found exactly what he was looking for. The courtroom remained eerily quiet, every pair of eyes fixed on Clara and the dog. She glanced up at Judge Grayson, who hovered nearby with an unreadable expression. His usual stern demeanor seemed to waver slightly, replaced by a flicker of unease. "Your Honor," Clara said calmly but firmly, "I need permission to inspect this area further. My dog has detected something that may be relevant to the proceedings." Her tone left no room for argument. It was clear she wasn't asking lightly. Still, Judge Grayson hesitated, his jaw tightening. He glanced around the room, perhaps gauging how this request might look to everyone watching. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded stiffly. "Very well," he muttered, stepping back to give her space. With careful precision, Clara pulled out a small multi-tool from her belt, a tool she always carried during investigations, and began examining the underside of the chair. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of what she was doing. Even the lawyers paused their whispered strategizing, too curious to focus on anything else. After a few moments, Clara's tool clicked against something solid. She reached in and carefully peeled away a strip of duct tape, revealing a small, sleek device hidden beneath the chair. The room erupted into murmurs as Clara held up the object for everyone to see. It was a recording bug, an illegal surveillance device designed to capture audio without anyone noticing. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and several people exchanged shocked glances. This was no ordinary discovery. It suggested someone had gone to great lengths to spy on private conversations within the courtroom. But who? And why? Judge Grayson's face turned pale as Clara turned to him, holding the device aloft. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but carrying a hint of accusation, "this appears to have been placed here intentionally. Do you know anything about it?" The judge stammered, clearly caught off guard. I have no idea how that got there," he replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Clara didn't press him further, not yet, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. As court staff gathered to document the discovery, Clara took a moment to observe Max. He was finally calm now, sitting obediently by her side as if his job was done. For now, she gave him a reassuring pat, silently thanking him for his instincts. Without him, this device might have gone unnoticed, continuing to record sensitive information undetected. But just as the initial shock began to settle, another wave of tension swept through the room. Max suddenly growled softly, low in his throat, drawing Clara's attention once again. His gaze shifted toward Judge Grayson, who instinctively took a step back. Clara frowned, her protective instincts kicking in. Why was Max still focused on the judge? Hadn't they already found the source of the problem? Her thoughts were interrupted by the prosecutor, who stood up and addressed the judge. Your Honor, given the circumstances, I believe we need to investigate how this device ended up in your chair and whether it compromises the integrity of this trial. The defense team immediately objected, arguing that the bug had nothing to do with their client's case. Meanwhile, reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, sensing a scandal brewing. Clara knew one thing for certain. Max's instincts weren't wrong. Something, or someone, in this courtroom had secrets to hide. And while the discovery of the bug answered some questions, it also raised countless others. As the murmurs grew louder and the tension thickened, Clara realized they were only scratching the surface of a much deeper mystery. Whatever came next, Max would be ready. And so would she. The courtroom was alive with tension as Clara held up the small recording device, her fingers gripping it firmly. Whispers filled the air like a low hum, and all eyes darted between the bug, Judge Grayson, and Max, who sat calmly but alertly by Clara's side. The judge stood frozen, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. He tried to speak, but his voice faltered. I assure you, I had no knowledge of this," he stammered, though his words carried little weight in the charged atmosphere. Clara studied him carefully, her instincts telling her there was more to uncover. Max, too, remained fixated on Judge Grayson, his ears perked and his body tense. It was as if the dog knew the truth before anyone else did, and Clara trusted him completely. She turned to the judge, her tone firm but respectful. "Your Honor, we need to understand how this device ended up here. Can you think of anyone who might have access to your chair, or any recent incidents that could explain this?" Judge Grayson hesitated, clearly uncomfortable under the scrutiny. He glanced around the room, avoiding direct eye contact with Clara or Max. Finally, he shook his head. "I can't imagine how this happened," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Clara didn't press further. Not yet. Instead, she motioned for a courthouse staff member to step forward. "Could you check if anyone has reported unusual activity in this area recently?" she asked. One of the janitors, an older man named Mr. Peterson, stepped forward reluctantly. He adjusted his cap and cleared his throat. "Well, there was something odd last night," he admitted, glancing nervously at the judge. "I saw someone near the bench when I came in early this morning. They said they were checking the wiring for sound issues, but now that I think about it," his voice trailed off, and he shrugged apologetically. "I didn't think much of it at the time." The prosecutor seized the opportunity, standing abruptly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. If someone tampered with your chair, it raises serious questions about the integrity of this trial, and possibly your involvement." The defense team erupted in protest, shouting objections and accusing the prosecution of slander. Judge Grayson slammed his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order, but the chaos only grew louder. Amid the commotion, Max began pacing slowly toward Judge Grayson, his movements deliberate and measured. Clara watched him closely, her heart racing. She knew Max wasn't acting randomly. He was following a scent or detecting something unsettling about the judge himself. When Max stopped directly in front of Judge Grayson and let out a soft growl, the entire room went silent. Even the skeptical spectators leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. Clara took a deep breath and addressed the judge again. "Your Honor, I must ask, are you certain you know nothing about this device? Max's behavior suggests otherwise." Judge Grayson swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. For a moment, he looked as though he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. He sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't plant it," he confessed quietly, his voice barely audible over the stunned silence. "But I knew it was there. Someone approached me weeks ago, offering money to monitor private discussions during this trial. I thought I could control the situation, use it to my advantage." His admission sent shockwaves through the room. Lawyers exchanged astonished looks, while reporters scribbled furiously, knowing they had the story of a lifetime. Clara exhaled sharply, her suspicions confirmed. Max had been right all along. His instincts had uncovered not just the bug, but also the betrayal hiding behind the judge's robes. As Judge Grayson was escorted out of the courtroom, Clara knelt beside Max, giving him a grateful pat. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice filled with pride. Thanks to him, justice would prevail. But the case was far from over. The courtroom was in turmoil as Judge Grayson's confession sank in. His word hung heavy in the air, leaving everyone stunned. The man who was supposed to uphold justice had been caught red-handed betraying it. Whispers erupted like wildfire, spreading through the room as people struggled to process what they'd just heard. Reporters scrambled to update their notes, knowing this story would dominate headlines for weeks. Lawyers on both sides exchanged frantic whispers, trying to figure out how this revelation would impact the trial. Clara stood near the front of the room, her hand resting gently on Max's back. She felt a mix of emotions: shock at the judge's betrayal, relief that Max's instincts had uncovered the truth, and anger at the breach of trust. Max, meanwhile, seemed calm now, his job apparently done. He sat quietly by her side, his tail sweeping slowly across the floor, as if he knew he played a crucial role in bringing justice closer. Judge Grayson, still seated in his chair, looked utterly defeated. His face was pale, and his hands trembled as he stared blankly ahead. "I didn't want it to go this far," he muttered under his breath, almost too softly for anyone to hear. But Clara caught his words and leaned closer, her expression hardening. "What do you mean, Your Honor?" she asked firmly. "Who approached you? And why did they want to monitor these proceedings?" For a moment, it seemed like Judge Grayson might refuse to answer. But then, with a deep sigh, he began to speak. It was one of the defendant's associates. He admitted, his voice low and shaky. "They offered me money, a lot of it, to plant the device and keep tabs on everything said in private. They wanted leverage, something to use against me or others involved in the case. I thought I could outsmart them, play both sides. But I see now that I made a terrible mistake." His confession sent another ripple of shock through the room. The defendant, sitting at the defense table, shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed with a mixture of fear and frustration. His lawyers whispered urgently into his ear, clearly trying to strategize damage control. Meanwhile, the prosecutor seized the opportunity, standing up to address the remaining officials. "This changes everything," he declared, his tone sharp and authoritative. "We cannot proceed without addressing the full extent of this corruption." As the reality of the situation set in, security personnel stepped forward to escort Judge Grayson out of the courtroom. He rose slowly from his chair, his head bowed in shame, and allowed himself to be led away. Spectators watched in silence as the once respected judge disappeared through the door, his reputation shattered. It was a sobering moment, a reminder that even those entrusted with power were capable of falling prey to greed. With Judge Grayson gone, the court appointed a temporary replacement, a retired judge named Martha Ellis, known for her integrity and no-nonsense approach. As she took her seat, the room fell silent, all eyes on her. "This trial will continue," she announced firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "But rest assured, every aspect of this corruption will be investigated thoroughly. Justice will not be compromised." Clara glanced down at Max, who tilted his head up to meet her gaze. She smiled faintly, grateful for his unwavering instincts. Thanks to him, the truth had come to light. But the case was far from over. There were still questions to answer, connections to uncover, and justice to serve. And as the courtroom settled back into order, one thing was certain: Max had proven himself not just as a loyal canine officer, but as a true guardian of fairness and honesty. With Judge Grayson removed from the courtroom and facing charges of his own, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Retired Judge Martha Ellis wasted no time taking control of the proceedings, her sharp eyes scanning the room as she adjusted her glasses. "We will not allow corruption to undermine this trial," she declared firmly, her voice ringing with authority. Every piece of evidence related to this case and any involvement by individuals in this room will be thoroughly examined. The prosecutor seized the moment, standing up to address the court. Your Honor, given the gravity of Judge Grayson's confession, we must consider the possibility that this corruption extends beyond him. His admission implicates associates of the defendant, suggesting a broader conspiracy. The defense team immediately objected, arguing that such claims were speculative and prejudiced their client. But Judge Ellis silenced them with a firm wave of her hand. Objections noted, but we cannot ignore the facts before us. This investigation will proceed accordingly. As the lawyers debated, Clara found herself replaying Judge Grayson's words in her mind. He had admitted to being bribed by one of the defendant's associates, but who exactly was behind it? And what role did the defendant play in orchestrating the scheme? She glanced down at Max, who sat quietly beside her, his keen senses still alert. If there was more to uncover, she knew he'd be the first to sense it. Judge Ellis called for a recess to allow both sides to regroup and strategize. During the break, Clara approached the prosecutor, offering her insights. Max detected something off about Judge Grayson, even after the bug was found, she explained. His instincts were spot on then, and I believe they can help us now. Let me bring him closer to the defendant's table. He might pick up on something useful. The prosecutor hesitated but eventually agreed, recognizing the potential value of Max's abilities. When the session resumed, all eyes turned to Clara and Max as they moved cautiously toward the defense side of the room. The defendant, a slick businessman named Victor Lang, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his polished demeanor faltering. His lawyers leaned in protectively, whispering warnings under their breath. Max sniffed the air intently, his nose twitching as he circled the area around Victor's table. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but then Max stopped abruptly, his body stiffening. He let out a low growl, staring directly at Victor. Clara noticed sweat forming on Victor's forehead as he avoided Max's gaze, his hands gripping the edge of the table tightly. One of Victor's lawyers tried to intervene, demanding that the dog be removed, but Judge Ellis intervened. Officer Hayes, is your canine indicating something specific? She asked pointedly. Clara nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Max is trained to detect stress responses, concealed items, or other anomalies. His reaction suggests there's something here worth investigating further. With Judge Ellis's permission, security personnel conducted a search of Victor's belongings. It didn't take long for them to find a hidden folder containing incriminating documents, emails, and financial records linking Victor to bribes paid to Judge Grayson and others involved in the conspiracy. Victor's composure crumbled as the evidence was presented to the court. This is outrageous, he shouted, slamming his fists on the table. I'm innocent. Someone must have planted those papers. But his protests fell flat. Even his own lawyers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the damning nature of the discovery. The courtroom erupted into murmurs once again, the weight of the revelations sinking in. Thanks to Max's instincts and Clara's determination, the web of corruption was unraveling faster than anyone could have anticipated. As Clara knelt beside Max, giving him an affectionate pat, she couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Justice wasn't just blind. It had 4 legs, a wagging tail, and a nose that never missed a clue. The final chapter of the trial unfolded with a sense of inevitability, as if the truth had been waiting all along to step into the light. With the incriminating documents uncovered, and Judge Grayson's confession on record, there was no room left for denial or evasion. Victor Lang, the once smug defendant, now slumped in his chair, his face pale, and his confidence shattered. His lawyers scrambled to mount a defense, but it was clear even to them that the evidence was insurmountable. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Judge Martha Ellis prepared to deliver her verdict. After careful consideration of the facts presented, Judge Ellis began, her voice steady and commanding. This court finds the defendant, Victor Lang, guilty on all charges of corruption, bribery, and conspiracy. A collective gasp rippled through the spectators, followed by murmurs of approval. Justice had prevailed, and it was thanks in large part to an unlikely hero, Max, the police dog whose instincts had unraveled the tangled web of deceit. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the trial, Clara couldn't help but smile. She knelt beside Max, wrapping her arms around his sturdy neck. "You did it, boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You helped bring down people who thought they were untouchable." Max wagged his tail, seemingly aware that he played a vital role in something much bigger than himself. Around them, reporters swarmed, eager to capture the moment for their stories. Cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust toward Clara as journalists peppered her with questions about Max's training and abilities. But the praise didn't stop there. Officers from across the region began advocating for greater inclusion of K-9 units in legal proceedings, citing Max's success as proof of their value. Local news outlets hailed him as a hero, running headlines like "Four-legged detective solves high-stakes case," and "Man's best friend becomes justice's greatest ally." Even skeptics who had doubted Max's presence in the courtroom admitted that his actions had changed their perspective. In the days that followed, Clara and Max became local celebrities. Strangers stopped them on the street to thank Max for his service, often offering pats on the head or treats. Schools invited Clara to speak about the importance of teamwork between humans and animals, and Max happily obliged by demonstrating some of his impressive skills. For Clara, it reinforced what she'd always believed, that dogs like Max weren't just tools. They were partners, companions, and protectors of justice. Judge Grayson, meanwhile, faced consequences for his betrayal. He resigned from his position in disgrace and awaited sentencing for his involvement in the conspiracy. It was a sobering reminder that trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. As for Victor Lang, he was sentenced to several years in prison, his empire crumbling under the weight of his crimes. Back at the precinct, life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such a whirlwind case. Clara and Max resumed their patrols, their bond stronger than ever. But every now and then, someone would mention the trial, and Clara would glance down at Max with a proud grin. "That's my good boy," she'd say, ruffling his fur affectionately. For Max, though, it was just another day on the job. He didn't need accolades or applause. His reward was knowing he'd made a difference. And as he trotted alongside Clara, tail held high, it was clear that justice wasn't just served, it was celebrated, one paw at a time.